talk to me. Okay. Preface to a 20-volume suicide note. LeRoi Jones's first book was composed between 1957 and 61. Arranged chronologically, the book feels distinct from the work Jones Baraka is now known for. That work, though suggested here in isolated snatches, is yet to be written. In this sense, this book is truly a preface. And why to a suicide note? That part makes sense only in retrospect. Jones is poised to begin a decades-long struggle to kill the white part of his consciousness. A belief common to black nationalists of the era was that many who are phenotypically black are ideologically white, therefore divided against themselves. This concept is explored in Jones's 1969 poem for half-white college students, where he writes, "Check yourself, learn who it is speaking, who it is you are, and is that image black or white?" What begins in Preface as an embrace of open form poetics, an opportunity to dig deep in his own mind and language, will develop over the coming volumes into revolutionary praxis. But as yet, that struggle is kept at a distance. Preface's style is equal parts field poetics, beat, and New York school. Jones hasn't arrived at a style quite, but more of an amalgam of influences. Though the authors in those movements had shifting perspectives, they often had well-defined approaches, habits, motifs. By contrast, the style of Preface feels uncertain, sometimes abstract lyric, sometimes visceral and incoherent, parodic in one poem, sincere in another. There's anger, but its object remains unclear. The issue of race lurks, yet feels mostly repressed. The second poem, Hymn for Laney Pooh, is most indicative of what Jones is repressing. In it, radically fragmented voices act out contradictory attitudes towards race and bohemia. The poem seems to critique both bohemians and the black bourgeoisie, but these critiques are equally directed at Jones himself. He lampoons a black man in a cafe for talking about politics, then turning to gawk at a blonde. Jones is married to a white woman when he writes this poem, and writes in disgust at black nationalists who claim this invalidates his right to address racialized oppression. Likewise, the poem labels his sister's boyfriend a faggot music teacher who digs Tchaikovsky. But Jones, who in this book references Strindberg, Rimbaud, Baudelaire, can't quite question the character of a man who digs Tchaikovsky without implicating himself. The poem is less about Jones making a critique and more about the discourse landscape he finds himself trapped in as a black poet and intellectual. He wants a life in art, not in politics, but politics follows him everywhere. He ends a 1961 letter to Dorne, the letter that accompanies the newly published preface, but also recounts his recent arrest in Harlem with, "What is this all about? Who knows? It's just that I've got to do something. I don't know. I'm picked. What I wanted and want was soft music and good stuffy purity of intent, of purpose, elegance even, of the mind. And now I'm fighting in the streets and the cops think I'm dangerous. I have people, old men on Harlem streets come up and shake my hand. Old ladies kiss me and nod. You are a good man. You will help us." Even at the end of Preface, which closes with 8 poems written after his visit to post-revolutionary Cuba, Jones expresses no desire to move towards a political poetry. These last pieces are not much different from the rest of the book, leaning, if anything, more towards the lyrical and harmonious. Whereas in earlier poems, anger felt submerged, was handled with parody and sarcasm, the anger in these last 8 is owned, but oddly integrated into a calm lyric. These poems were written around the same time as Cuba Libre, his essay about the trip, and they seem to embrace its final section, where he holds to the purely cultural rebellion of the beats, poetry as soul nourishment, not praxis. One poem from this section from an almanac sees our time as a cruel one, our soul's warmth left out. In Betancourt, the one poem written in Cuba, he accepts poetry as something apart from the cruel world. In a near echo of Wordsworth, he writes, I mean, I think I know now what a poem is, a turning away from what it was had moved us, a madness, looking at the sea and some white fast boat. So the poet of Preface accepts, regretfully, the poem as a turning away. He will not be a revolutionary. The closing poem of the book begins, African blues does not know me, and ends, Africa is a foreign place. You are, as any other sad man here, American.